About chapter 25, section 4, and it's called Reforming the Industrial World. Because you see, the Industrial Revolution is great. It gave us manufactured clothing. It gave us electricity. But you know what else it gave us? Substandard wages. It also gave us income inequality. It gave us the working poor. It gave us all kinds of social problems that went along with the Industrial Revolution. But iPhones, right? Wait. So I want to first go into a couple of theories that we're working off of here for the lesson. Number one is laissez-faire. The old way during the Industrial Revolution was that the government shouldn't have anything to do with business. That true capitalism is the voluntary exchange of goods and services. The voluntary exchange of goods and services. That's invisible hand applied. If you truly believe that capitalism is the voluntary exchange of goods and services, if you don't want that job for that money, don't work that job. If you don't want that thing for that price, don't buy that thing. And here's the life lesson. If enough people don't work that job, if enough people don't buy that thing, then job and thing will change, and they will become better. And so this goes all the way back to the Enlightenment philosophers. Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations saying just that in so many words. He truly believed that economic liberty would guarantee economic progress. Because here's the thing. If I hire Brooklyn and Abby and they sleep on the job, I'm within my rights to fire them. And here's the point. If that's unfair, well, then no one will come and work for me. I won't have workers. I'll go out of business. And the market will evolve.
I'll work for you.
Yeah. And so the point is that economic liberty, according to Adam Smith, guarantees economic progress. That if sleeping on the job is something that helps economic progress, maybe you need nap time every now and then okay, that will evolve on its own. The government's just getting in the way by trying to make up stupid rules. So economic liberty guarantees economic progress. Another case in point. Did you know there's a thing called a $2,000 phone now?
Yeah, it's the Samsung.
The foldable, yeah, I know. A $2,000 phone. Let me be grumpy old man for a sec. This was $150. Works great. It's waterproof, 4 gigs of RAM, makes phone calls, text, Instagram, has a selfie camera, all the things. Yeah, and $150, and it does all the things. Now, you can pay $2,000, and it does all the things plus folds. Okay, great. I know, right. And I don't want to be too grouchy about this, but here's the point. $2,000 phones are here to stay. And why are they here to stay? Because someone is going to do it. Someone is going to... I predict that within the next year, some kid at this school will have a foldable phone. We can make fun of them all we want, but someone will have a foldable phone. And then another prediction. By the time you leave this school, there will be, I'm going to predict and say 10 of the students in your class, by the time you leave this school, will have foldable phones. All right, 10. 10 out of the 40-ish of you. Yeah, now here's the thing. And over time, more of you will have them. So the $2,000 phone is here to stay because economic liberty guarantees economic progress. But here's why I predict 10 of you will have it by the time we leave. It won't be $2,000 anymore. It's $2,000 now for a foldable phone. By the time you graduate, I'm going to predict and say a foldable phone will be roughly $500, if that. Okay, that's my prediction. Now, granted, we've got 4 to 5 years to make it happen. So I think it's a pretty safe bet. Okay, because economic liberty guarantees economic progress. Those $2,000 phone buyers are paying for your $500 foldable phone down the road. The fact that we buy luxuries now make luxuries down the road easier. Bottom line, capitalism makes some really nice phones. Okay? I've got some other natural laws to go into that Adam Smith wrote about. For one, that we are self-interested. We are self-interested human beings. We are, right? You want to work a job this summer. Why? Maybe to help your family. Maybe you have that deep down motive to help your family. You probably want to earn some money to have nice things. I mean, let's be honest. You know, what motivates me to work hard? Yes, I want to help my family. Yes, I want to pay our bills. Absolutely. But what motivates me on my third job? Stuff. For me. Selfish interest. Second job. Stuff. For me. Selfish interest. You know, we're motivated by selfish interest. I have 3 jobs, by the way. So we're motivated by self-interest. Yeah. 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 I also teach for the college, and then I teach online. So, yeah, 3 jobs. Yeah. So, moving on. We are motivated by our self-interest. Period. We are also motivated by competition. That competition is a natural economic law. And here's the thing. $2,000 foldable phone, that's Samsung, right?
Yeah.
Let's say Google makes a $1,000 foldable phone. That's just as good. Competition, right? Now, here's the point. This is why I'm predicting the $500 foldable phone. Competition. Because someone will undersell them, someone will undersell them, someone will undersell them, and eventually the supply of foldable phones will exceed the demand for them. Ergo, price will go down, and we'll all have foldable phones. That's a natural law of economics. It can be predicted, it can be studied, it can be measured. And also, perhaps the most important for last, supply-demand. I already explained it a little bit. Supply-demand. You know, right now, every single... By the way, the Avengers movie was amazing. If you haven't seen it already, we'll talk soon. But it is I'll give you guys another week to see it if you haven't, and then we're going to start spoiling it. But, yeah, you got another week. Come on, guys, clock's ticking. But the point is, the Avengers movie was the largest opening release in the history of movies, if you haven't already heard. But it was also opened in more theaters than any other movie in the history of movies. It had more rooms showing that movie at the same time than any other movie in the history of movies. So the supply of Avengers is high. But would you argue that the demand for Avengers is also high? Are people going to see this thing? Come on, guys. $1.2 billion in revenue for the first weekend. People are going. Demand is high because it is awesome. Let's be clear. There's a Fortnite reference, you know, for your spoiler alert. Okay. So supply and demand are high, but what is going to happen to the Avengers when demand drops? We'll eventually hit a point where everybody's seen it. And then the second goers are going to see it a second time. And the third goers are going to see it a third time. And eventually there will come a point where demand begins to drop. Will the supply, are they going to keep it in as many theaters? No, what do? They begin to drop it down. And drop it down. Eventually it will go to Netflix unless Disney takes over before. So the point is that eventually supply and demand will reach an equilibrium. That's what it's in fact called, is that the supply has to match the demand, otherwise that's bad business, and Avengers begins to lose money. Nobody wants that because we want more Avengers movies. Okay, so Adam Smith's ideas here make perfect sense and are central to the capitalist system. But he also argued that government just gets in the way of all this. And we'll see how the history plays out.
With its power to take individual decisions, wants, and needs and turn them into a viable functioning economy, the free marketplace is an extraordinary entity. However, the free market is not without its failures. One way the market can fail is if signals are either not transmitted or not received. For example, when the availability of oil was changed by war in oil-producing countries, the warning signals of an impending price change in fuel were not received clearly by some airline companies. In the late 80s, some airlines did not see that rising fuel costs and deregulation would change the profitability of their scheduled flights, and consequently, some of them went bankrupt. The market can also fail because of seemingly independent transactions that have, in reality, more far-reaching effects. For instance, the owner of this residential lot may wish to build a store like this on her lot, an apparently independent economic decision. But people have learned that store traffic has a big impact on child safety, noise, and the comfort of residents in the neighborhood. Therefore, the seemingly independent transaction of building a store in a residential neighborhood has many third-party consequences which make the decision far more complicated. In a completely free market economy, the needs of the third party are not a factor. Decisions are made only to meet the needs of the marketplace. For instance, high demand for iron used in the manufacture of millions of automobiles produced worldwide makes it too expensive to be used for building affordable housing for low-income families. Here, the market has difficulty taking into account third-party interests in an otherwise two-party transaction. Monopolies, the control of a good or service by one company, can also cause the market to fail. If meat producing were done exclusively by one large monopolistic meat company, it would not have to respond to market signals, since there would not be any independent meat producers who could compete for a share of the market. In the interest of profitability, the monopolistic meat company could only supply the meats that were the cheapest to produce. However, consumers could boycott all meat products, or government could intervene and break up the company.
So let's get into the economics of capitalism. Now, I've got a doomsday theory for you here. And no, this is not a DC Universe thing. The doomsday theory is, as proposed by Thomas Malthus, the famous economist. He said that the amount of farmable land in this world grows at best arithmetically, meaning we can add to it every so often. We can grow in the desert. You know, we'll add to the farmable land in this world piece by piece. But he also said the population of this world grows exponentially. And his prediction is famine. He said there is an old check on population in this world. An old check. Goes all the way back to the very earliest species. And that is famine. That when a population outgrows its food source, the population dies off until it equalizes with the food source. And so Malthus predicted famine. And he also said, guess what comes with famine on the human scale? War. Why? Because you're not just going to sit there and go, well, I can't afford bread, guess I'll just starve to death. No, what are you going to do if you're literally starving? You'll steal, and you should. And you'll kill. And I'm not going to argue that you should, but you will. Because you will. You will steal and kill to get food to feed yourself and your family, because that's just human nature. And so he actually predicted large-scale wars and tied to large-scale famine. And that these wars and these epidemics and these famines kill off all the extra people. And the population equalizes. It stabilizes. So basically, if population growth becomes excessive, the natural forces will balance it back out. It's pretty dark, right? It's a dark way of looking at things. And David Ricardo also predicted that in a post-industrial world, there will always be a poor working class. Why? Because, at least this was true back then, the world needs ditch diggers. As long as the world needs ditch diggers, there will be ditch diggers. As long as there is a demand for these unskilled jobs, there will be people to fill them. Ergo, there will always be a poor working class. Some other theories for you. Utilitarianism. This is Jeremy Bentham's idea. He said, we should look at things primarily through their usefulness. We should look at things primarily through their usefulness. So he said, look, I get the whole Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations, capitalism idea. I get laissez-faire economics. But what if rules could prove to be useful? What if? What if I can prove that empowering the working class is actually good for the economy? Because what are they going to do with that money? They're going to spend it. They're going to buy iPhones, which will incentivize people to make more iPhones, because that will help iPhones profit. And so that's the theory of utilitarianism. He actually argued through economics the importance of providing regulations to help workers, to ultimately spread the wealth. There were also another number of utopians during the Industrial Revolution. For example, like Robert Owen, who tried to set up his own utopian community in Indiana, called it New Harmony. He said everybody who works there can rent homes really cheap, can have really good jobs, and have really good working conditions. And that was his effort, was to create a utopian society where all the workers commonly owned the factory and everybody worked together for their own common good. But often these utopia societies were undone by some of the very theories that we've just learned, by people who are motivated by selfish interest. And another important theory that we need to learn, socialism. You hear this one a lot on television, right? You hear this one often used in a negative connotation. Well, I want to explain socialism. Socialism means that the factors of production are owned and operated by the people. The factors of production. This is not all business. This is not communism. It's very different. The factors of production. What are they? Well, at this time, it was timber. It was coal. It was steel. Those are the basic building blocks of production. And now we could even add energy, and we could add transportation. We could add healthcare. These are things that everybody needs equally. If those are owned by the people, then those things that we already use equally can be distributed fairly. And then on top of that, if you want your $2,000 phone, buy your $2,000 phone. But you're all going to use roads. You're all going to use schools. You're all going to get sick. You're all going to need timber, coal, oil, steel at some point. So let's just collectively own those things. And then again, you can still have your foldable phone. That's what socialism means. Socialists argued that this system could potentially end poverty. It's ambitious, right?
By 1900, another political movement emerged, demanding even more radical change, an end to capitalism itself. Eugene V. Debs was one of the founders of this new political force, the Socialists. Socialists felt that the industrial age and its capitalist culture was responsible for the wide disparity between the handful of rich and the working poor of America. Debs's proposed solution was to eliminate private ownership. Many middle and upper-class Americans disagreed with the socialists. They too felt that big business was out of control and American workers were being taken advantage of. These progressives felt they could improve capitalism by making government more responsive to social inequities. Progressives wanted instead to reform government and business, ensuring decent working conditions and wages and fair governmental rule.
Distinguish this with communism. Two different things. Let's be clear. Now, communism as a theory was proposed by Karl Marx, the German journalist. He considered himself a radical socialist, thinking, let's take it a step further than just owning the means of production. He and Friedrich Engels, another prominent member of this group, who actually owned a textile mill, decided to publish their theories. His most famous work, and I have a copy of it if you ever want to borrow it, it's called the Communist Manifesto. You can also look it up online. It's really not that complicated. He believed that society is divided into two classes. There are, on one side, the haves. He called these the bourgeoisie, the haves. They're the one percenters. They own and control most of the wealth in the nation, like the Walton family. And then there are the have-nots. He said these roughly comprise 98% of a general country's population. 98% of the world's population would fall into what he called the have-nots. His term was the proletariat. And he argued that eventually the have-nots will realize that they are 98% of the world's population, and they will overthrow the haves. Because it just, from his point of view, seemed inevitable. It seemed inevitable. Why? Because when he argued that if you concentrate the world's wealth into too few hands, the many will take it. And that repression only serves to empower the oppressed. And he was the one who said that workers of the world will eventually unite to overthrow the shackles of capitalism. Marx believed that capitalism would ultimately destroy itself, that it would implode, that this rampant inequality would cause workers to revolt, to seize factories and mills, and to take over the means of production for themselves, and that eventually this would result in communism. He called it the communist utopia, a society where people collectively own and share the means of production. That's the other step, and share the means of production. These ideas have become extremely popular in very poor places, particularly in Russia, in China, in Cuba, in North Korea, in hundreds of countries around the world. And time has shown that society is controlled not just by economic forces alone, according to Marx.
Factory work was much different from the system of cottage industry. Under the old system, cloth merchants had a fairly close relationship with their workers and generally took an interest in their well-being. But large factories and rigid production schedules did not allow for much familiarity between owners and workers. And factory work was more tiring than home manufacturing, even though the factories kept the same 12 to 14-hour work schedule, 6 days a week, that the cottage workers had followed. Factory work had greater production demands, was very monotonous, and few breaks were allowed. Plus, working conditions in factories were much worse than in cottage settings. Many of the earliest factories, referred to by labor reformers as the dark, satanic mills, were noisy and dangerous places in which to work, full of dust and fumes that often resulted in permanent physical damage to workers. Children, robbed of their childhoods, worked long hours in the mills, and women and children were paid only a fraction of what the men earned. Many mill owners believed that the lower classes had to be kept poor in order to make them industrious. But even though wages were low, at least workers could rely on them, so that they rarely faced the extreme poverty they had known in the past. Although the working classes did not at first share in the wealth created by the Industrial Revolution, the middle and upper classes prospered, and great fortunes were made as wealth shifted from the hands of land-owning aristocrats to factory-owning capitalists. One famous social critic of the time, who worked to bring about changes in the law to benefit the poor working classes, was Charles Dickens. His books offer vivid portrayals of life during the first Industrial Revolution. And Karl Marx, a Dickens contemporary, who lived in England for much of his life, wrote his two famous books, Das Kapital and the Communist Manifesto, in response to the social injustices he witnessed as a result of industrialization. During the time of Marx and Dickens, many factories had switched to coal instead of water as a source of power. The problem with using water or wind to run machines was that they could be unreliable sources of energy. A windmill couldn't operate on windless days, and a water-powered factory came to a complete halt during dry spells.
One of the nonviolent applications of these theories is unions. Unions are associations of workers who unite for common goals, seeking change. They negotiate for better pay and conditions with their employers by working collectively. One of the most powerful tools that workers and unions can utilize is the strike, a work stoppage that can pressure owners into doing something. Because very simply, if you go on strike, the owners can't make their money because the employees actually generate the profit for the owners. The first time the strike was utilized in the United States, 800 women walked out of mills in Massachusetts. And they just fired them all. All 800 of them, fired them all. Wrote down their names on a list so they would never work again. The next time was skilled workers, like blacksmiths, artisans, steel, people who are harder to replace. And they began to form unions, and they began to have a powerful effect, resulting in higher wages, shorter hours, improved working conditions, many of the things that we already take for granted. And some of the earliest reform laws, like in the United States, were passed to stop the worst abuses of industrialization, like this young man working in a coal mine. By the way, that's an early version of a headlamp because he is crawling in tunnels for a living. He's not going to live very long breathing coal dust the way that he is. But he has to work in that type of condition because it's all he can find. He's going to work for less pay than an adult because of his economic situation. He has no choice. The U.S. finally put an end to this in 1904 with child labor laws. This young man was working in West Virginia, and his photograph was taken by Lewis Hine, one of these socialists. Slavery, as you know, was abolished in 1865 in the United States. It took the American Civil War to make that happen. It was ended throughout the world in most countries by the end of the 1800s. The fight for women's rights continues, pushing today for economic pay equity. The International Council for Women was founded in 1888, seeking worldwide membership for women who are frustrated with their condition. Now, reformers have worked to improve many different aspects of our daily lives. The first free public schools date back to Europe in the late 1800s. The very first tax-supported school in the United States was in Pennsylvania in 1834. But by the 1850s, there were public school systems in most states. Prison reform was also a major goal of a woman named Aretha Dix, who worked to improve conditions in prisons and even mental asylums.